FinOps
Yes.
is a topic I'm hearing a lot about, especially in the last 6 months, I'd say.
Yep.
What does it mean to you, FinOps, when we're talking around the customers that we're working with?
I think for me, FinOps is all about driving that accountability and utilizing that to further business sort of value and spend. I think the core value to me is looking at how do you actually approach cloud and how you operate and how that links to actually billing as well. Making sure who's accountable, who's got decisions over, ability to spend, etc., or deploy units. I would say it's also about including more finance and procurement. I think as engineers, we're very much siloed from finance and procurement, and that could be often for good reason, but in reality, it is needed, particularly with the current spend, etc.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. I guess one thing that our clients often talk about with FinOps is Contino, come and talk to us about it.
Yeah.
Because I want to just lower my cloud spend. Now, that isn't really the case of FinOps. Would
No.
you agree?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the initial attractiveness of FinOps is that cloud saving. I
Yep.
think a lot of people are later in the journey, let's say they've committed for 5 years, etc. They've either overspent or the budget's coming to a close and they're becoming a bit more reactive. They're like, let's just save as much money as possible and then focus around it later. But actually to do FinOps from a long-term success standpoint, you need to put in those key fundamentals and go through, the FinOps foundation of an excellent, I call it the bit of the donut really. It's like three different stages which you can assess your maturity level and processes to go around.
We talked about what FinOps means to you.
Yeah.
And we also said that FinOps isn't just about lowering your cloud spend, although that is a benefit that
Yes.
our customers can get. What are the other benefits of FinOps for a large organization, and why should they be taking it more seriously now? Not just from, I want to lower my cloud bill from X to Y.
I would say it's more around openness and accountability, is making sure, every organization does internal cost control different, right? It may go up to a CTO who may report it to the CFO. It may go down that. You may have a manager who will send a monthly your AWS bill to procurement and they don't understand it, etc. So I think the key three areas to me is that visibility, accountability, and also, understanding more of how the cloud operates from a financial standpoint to people like procurement and finance.
Do you mind if we talk around some pain points and some real horror stories? Because I know you've got a few around FinOps in organizations and where it's either been done badly or where they haven't had anything in place and things have just spiraled out of control. I think you've got a good example. We'll keep it anonymous. We don't want to throw anyone under the bus. But yeah, what's been a really kind of eye-opener for you when you were getting into FinOps and some pain points that you've seen?
I think, speaking to some of our customers, one of the, one example we've had is that a developer spent £250,000 over a weekend.
Right.
There was no financial guardrails, controls, etc.
Yeah.
They just went and did it. And luckily, they have visibility in place. And, from that incident, they came to us and we started discussing FinOps with them.
Yeah.
But I've seen it, where, for example, developer has spun up, £40,000, £50,000 worth of work. And then it's got to finance 3 months later and they've gone, well, that's a bit of an anomaly. Or finance just see the overall bill and don't see that as an issue.
Right.
From a community standpoint, I see plenty of students, for example, starting to learn AWS. It's one thing Azure does really well, is that when you sign up for Azure for Students, it immediately cuts off. I think AWS in the process of doing this, but I've seen some students with £10,000-20,000 bills.
Right.
And as a student, you don't typically have that kind of money to spend on, on cloud spend. Luckily, AWS support are very good and, appreciative, etc., and I have waived a lot of the bills. But it's just around not having that, controls and guardrails, I think is the key, which has caused those issues and pain points, etc. It's happened to me personally. I was doing an Azure project, accidentally left some things on, spent £300 over the weekend, and I didn't have any visibility in place, just a quick account I spun up. Stupidly, should have put it in place. Saw the bill, a month or two later, and I'm like, damn it. So it happens to everybody. I think a lot of people have personal FinOps pains, and then also seeing it in the organization as well.
Okay. Yeah, that 40, was it 40,000 you said for that
40, 50. I've seen quite a few 40, 50,000s over my time. I think other than the £250,000 one, I think I've seen a couple of six-figure ones as well.
It's tricky because as a developer, you want to be empowered to make changes, deploy changes and test your code. Yeah. But you don't want to be given a £40,000-50,000 bill at the same time. Yep. So there's ways that organizations can help. There's a FinOps Foundation are doing a really good job
100%.
in helping set out, as you said, 3 kind of iterative processes that you can go through. For someone who's fairly new to the cloud or has just joined a new organization, what are the things they should be doing so they don't get these kind of scary bills?
I would say be more proactive, not so much reactive. I think traditionally in IT, like this is the reason why we have SRE, we have operations teams, etc., is that we have that reactive approach. And actually, one that I read the SRE handbook by Google, and how I really like how they do SRE is that 50% of the time is focusing on proactive and 50% is more the reactive. I think from a FinOps standpoint, it's having those operational guardrails in place, and just having a conversation, talking like, have you got a tagging strategy as a team? Have you got a monthly FinOps forum, or are you discussing, for example, on a Friday in your Scrum meeting, what is your annual spend this week? Have you got any tools or visibility or monitoring in place, etc.? Having budgets and the ability to sort of, if you do see an anomaly, let's say, for example, you spend £1,000 a week, and you spent £1,000 a week for the past year, and 1 week, you're going to put a bit of development, so you're going to see it's going to spike to 1250,
right?
But you spend 1500. So you should have an anomaly in place, whether that's a manual, someone checking it every day, or that's more of an automated process. You should be able to see and react to that anomaly and put it in place. Because going back to those 50, 100, or £250,000 anomaly spends, if they have the visibility, whether that's automated monitoring in the first place, those bills will probably be a tenth of what they are,
right?
And 25 grand is, although hard to swallow, much easier to swallow than £250,000. So.
I think I'm going to keep going back to this point of that poor person who spent 40 to 50,000, because that's quite hard for them to deal with. But I guess the point I'd like to kind of go into here is, whose responsibility is it for flagging that spend?
It's a tough one, because as a developer, traditionally we're not metrified on like spend. Right. We're all our higher ups care about really is a case of, are we developing features fast? Are we pushing things out? And as a developer, if you've now got the control, you're not putting in request operations to put a VM on a Dell server that you've got your data center, you can go into the cloud and spend it. So in my opinion, you should be accountable for that spend. I think developers often don't care, and there's actually projects in FinOps Foundation how they're trying to gamify this, etc. But to me, if you're spending, you should be accountable. But if it goes wrong, I think unless most organizations have that blameless culture, which we should, be looking at in IT, because everybody will make a mistake at some point, whether it's dropping a production database or spending 50 grand. But I think it's, in your reporting line, is it your manager who's then responsible for overall team? Is it the FinOps team who are responsible from a training standpoint to reduce it? I mean, it is inevitable that you likely will go over or have an anomaly spend at some stage. One very early in career example I had is that I had an SQS pipeline which would send an email for an application that I built. I didn't put any guardrails in the SQS pipeline. It built up to 8 million emails, and that was sort of the first example which I saw before I even knew what FinOps was of an anomaly spend. We were a small organization. I think the bill was like £800, £900 on average. Monthly bill was like 200-300,
right?
And I remember it's like that was a huge deal to us as an SME. So I think every level that you're at, it's just having that visibility and training should prevent that.
I guess, Ethan, I should let you know I've never dropped a database, production database. Never done it, mate.
Oh, you've got to do at least one stage.
I've done a
career.
denial of service attack on a
okay.
GitHub repository before.
Nice.
That was quite bad. But cost-wise, I've been fairly okay.
Yeah.
And never taken down a prod database that I'm aware of, which is good. But going back to, hopefully I never make this mistake. And if you're with me, then I shouldn't make that mistake, right? But going back to, it's not just the developer who's accountable for this. They need to have certain ownership of this. But what role do IT, procurement, other stakeholders play in FinOps?
Traditionally, procurement's job has always stopped when the item is delivered, right? 20 years ago, for example, it would be a case of, I need to request 1,000 Dell servers and the list price is £1 million. Procurement would then go to Dell and negotiate, right, okay, we're going to place 1,000 servers. They might get, 10, 20% discount or whatever, depending on their overall spend. they would then oversee the case of how that's delivered, and then it would go to someone in a data center, rack and stack it, etc. And their job traditionally finishes there, and that might be for a lot of organizations if they're dealing with IT procurement. Of once every 3 years, once every 4 years, you might have a bit of a refresh, more servers, more specialized stuff, but that's traditionally it, right? And if procurement is approving every single cloud spend, if you think about it, you spend up, an Azure App Service, etc. There's multiple supporting services that you can select or add in on that. So from a billing perspective, it might be £1 to app service, £1 to a database, £1 to domains, etc. So it's an itemized spend, and you could spin up, let's say 10 a day, for argument's sake, and let's say you do that 20 days out of the month. That's a lot of things to manually approve. So, and it would also hurdle innovation. So of course, procurement isn't going to individually, procure an EC2 instance, procure it, because a cloud transformation would take 100 years, but now they're being more involved in a sense of that they're looking at, like, procurement and finance are very traditional industries, right? You've got like the ACCA certification, etc., which I believe it is. They're trained to a certain standard, and they're used to dealing with more traditional industries. Obviously, the cloud, these qualifications and further training haven't come into place. And to be fair to the vendors like AWS and Azure and Google, from what I've seen, they're not putting out specialist trainings procurement. Like, they have conversations if you're spending, committing to 100 to 200 million, etc., or maybe even smaller if you, I'm sure you politely ask for it. But without that training, they don't know how to understand an itemized cloud bill. And this is why the FinOps Foundation working on a project called Focus, where it's all about open billing. And I'm really impressed that, Azure, AWS and Google and a few other cloud vendors have got together to create this standard. It's something which Contino are trying to get involved with as well. Try and help it from a vendor standpoint, putting in feedback, etc. But without that training, they just won't be able to understand it, and they won't be able to assess. Like, you may commit to 100 million over 4 years, and let's say you spent 40 million the first year, and then your cloud bill's still 40 million. Like, do you over procure? Do you under procure? They won't be used to signing these massive deals, etc. For a variable kind of spend. I think one reason why actually how we differ at Contino is we look at the on-premises, landscape and spend as well. Like, our expertise is in on-premises to cloud migrations, but we can also look at it from a cost and business value perspective. Actually, is it worth you moving to the cloud? And when you do, let's say you've got 1,000 VMs in your data center, we can help right size and do pre-FinOps work in the data center. And let's say we get that down 700, you're then spending less because you're not overcommitting. I have seen numerous organizations who've committed to a large bill with the cloud vendor, and then it's essentially dead money if you don't spend it, because they'll put in additional things. You might get an SA support or a technical account manager or a CSAM included, etc. So they just drastically try and overspend or do some crazy projects. That's the wrong way to look at it. And actually, from a finance and procurement standpoint, having the correct bill from the get-go, the correct amount you need to procure and budget for, is much easier in my opinion. So but organizations don't look at that part. They'll do the business value to the cloud, etc., and they'll say it's cheaper, but actually, do you need that part? Okay. It's quite key for me.
I'm going to tell you another secret.
Okay.
So just before this recording, I was on a call with procurement for one of our customers.
All right. Okay.
And I've walked away from that call, realizing that procurement's view of cloud spend is very static. So what they asked me was, "Hey Rosh, you've given me what's going to be the cost of running my estate in 3 years' time on the cloud. But can you give me a view of years 1 to 2 of all the development costs, of all the sandbox environments that we spin out, as well as the consulting fees along the way?" And I was like, I can't do it. Like, I genuinely can't do it. We don't know what the architecture is going to look like. We don't know how many developer teams we're going to have on the ground. We just don't know how this is going to scale. What I can tell you is once we've optimize everything to a certain degree from year 3 onwards, this is roughly what your cost is going to be. But I can't say to you with confidence, this is a fixed number. So you're right to say that procurement needs education in this space, because they do see the world as quite transactional, going back to give me a rack like it's 2002. But that's a really big challenge I see for procurement. So I guess my question is, and I know you agree with that, what other departments within IT or beyond IT also have that static view that you think need upskilling along the way?
I would say, it's a tough one. I think it's pretty much solved now, but I think operations traditionally were very traditionally operations never thought about spend, right? It's a case of a developer build an application, they already have that, data center estate, etc. You don't need to procure every time. They have that static 1,000 servers. They're currently at capacity of 700. There's no need for them to, they've got capacity, and then when they're running out of capacity, then they'll have a 12-month plan to upgrade or, add additional servers or space, etc. So it's never been a foundational cost over the past 40 years, right? Traditionally, once you have that estate, you might as well use it. So operations now need to think about if they're scale, you've got the ability to scale up or down, depending on demand. I was recently in AWS meetup, and a really good example of how an organization is doing it is they have a business value case, like looking at unit economics and the value, etc. Is for them to scale up, will they actually make profit on that? Or is it worth worsening, customer experience, etc., or delaying it a couple seconds, but they'll make, more profit margin. So looking at it that way, it's not just a case of it's on there. You've actually got to think you can actually look at the cloud as like a further business value, in unit economics, etc. To further, actually, is it worth putting up in place? Is it worth being faster? Is it worth being multi-region? All that kind of thing. So
you touched on a few keywords there, and I think it's important for the audience we address what they are, just in case people aren't sure, because there's quite a lot of buzzwords within FinOps, and there's a lot of buzzwords in our industry, right? Cloud economics. What does that mean to you?
I would say that's more the traditional phase before FinOps. I think it's essentially just looking at the economics of the cloud. Is it viable? Is it cheaper than data centers? Etc. Like, to me, if I, for example, was going to university and doing a degree, I would look at something like land economy, because like, how do you strategically, put a data center, etc., the land that it's on, where it's located, and then how does that affect your end user price? Because what people don't realize is that when you buy an EC2 instance, let's say, and it's £2 an hour, right? In that cost, you will have, let's say, 50 pence for the data center upkeep, security, land, etc. 50 pence might be for electricity. Another 50 pence might be for internal support, etc. And then 25 pence will be for development and all that kind of thing. And then there'll be 25 pence profit. But it's all, the margins are all scaled down. It's that what's the phrase now? Economics of scale. Right, it's the ability. It's why you can go out and buy a loaf of bread for £1. Right, you're not paying a baker who's doing just yours. It's built in a factory and it's all done. So I think that's one thing to look at it, is that when people think of data centers, etc. Yes, your data center might cost you, let's say, £2.5 million in capital expense and build out. You then pay Dell and HP £1 million for your servers that last 5 years. You'll then flog them to a reseller who's going to put them on eBay and probably get 10 grand for them at the end of it. And looking at your overall spend, yes, your £2.5 million you can constantly get back. But what you don't realize is that you've got to pay the security guards. You've got to pay, for things like security maintenance, etc. I mean, certain data centers have got things like anti-tank mines, right? Those kind of things cost a lot of money in maintenance. You've then got overall electricity bills, etc. So actually, from a cloud standpoint and from finance and procurement, it's much easier to understand. Although the bills are quite complicated, they can just see server, right? There's no data center costs, and that's how actually. It's a bit ironic, because I think it's always been in IT, is that you have that centralized budget. There's no internal chargeback or showback for a data center. I spoke to very few customers and clients, across all the job, and even working hands-on more as a practitioner, is that with the data center, you don't manually, like, let's say you've got 20 value streams in business, your data center costs 10 million a year. I've seen very few organizations take $500,000 per business unit out. You have a central IT budget, which the CFO sets or the CEO or the board set, etc. And that has that cost. It's same with cloud. They're following a traditional model. It's a case of they have £10 million for cloud, etc. It all goes into one central budget. But in reality, those 20 value streams, going back to that previous example, one might be spending 2 million, one might have just started their example and they're only spending 20k a year. And it's a bit unfair. I think now, into those internal value streams are sort of gains, gain levels, they're all at a similar kind of level. It's, do they do that internal chargeback and showback? And we've seen it with one customer recently, is that they've started to now do that. They've now actually started to charge, different business units, etc. And they've all gone up in arms. It's like, well, I didn't realize I've got to budget £1 million, or it's same with sort of cloud transformations as well. It's a bit of a unique one personally.
And to be clear there, what you're saying is, if I am head of middle IT and I've got a team of 30 and my cloud bill is 100k a month, what you're saying is the wider business will charge me that 100k a month for running those services. That might take away from my budget to hire new people in my team. Is that what you're getting to there?
I would say if you've got, a lot of organizations have a centralized platform team, right? And then each business unit or product, etc., will then, vendor subscription, build on top of it, etc. And that central platforming team will maintain it. And they will traditionally do the costs as well.
Right.
So if you've got, let's say that central platforming team, it all costs, etc., is 10 million a year.
Sure.
And traditionally the CEO, CFO has said, we're committing to cloud 30 million over 3 years.
Yep.
Here's 10 million to the platforming team. It's just one central stream budget.
Yep.
But if you've got 10 different business units and they're all consuming that platform, traditionally they're not paying the money to the platforming team, right? Because there's no internal charge. They're not going on internal billing platform and going, yes, I want that, and some internal money changes hands. It's not happening.
No.
But then now organizations starting to realize, and they are starting to do that, and they're not prepared for it, or they're not used to it. So there's a lot of, in my opinion, training and expertise that needs to go in around that area. Is how do you do internal, show back and charge back? I was at a FinOps Foundation meetup in London the other week, and I can't remember who it was. They had a brilliant example of, they took a VM in the cloud, and they were able to literally charge back each individual cost. So they knew that, like, if it was operating 24 hours, etc., they knew the running costs, they knew to bill it. So that, like, if they had a very large server, and they knew it was costing £50 an hour, they could tell each business unit who was consuming it, like a centralized security server, etc. They could go in and individually bill it almost to like the penny, and then charge it back to internally. I think that's, to me, the way forward. But I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Do you think that's a healthy thing to do? And the reason I ask that, it's if I can give that granularity of what teams are using cloud. It's a good thing to show chargebacks and usage per team. And it could show some potential inefficiencies of how they're using things and just their culture on using the cloud. But it could also hinder how innovative they could be on the cloud by saying, your bill last month was a bit high compared to the other teams. Can you show me the value of what you've done? And maybe it works both ways, but like, where's that balance for you?
I think it can, in my opinion, I think it's going back to the early conversation of, to me, FinOps is not just saving the most money or being so efficient. To me, if you've been in the cloud, all your estate that you want to move is in there, you've been growing for multiple years, you've got all the teams in place, that's when you can start what I call being a bit more tight and focusing on that individual granular level costs. To me, if you're still going through that journey, why would you do that? Because it does hurdle innovation. And there is a lot of, as I was saying, there's a project going in FinOps Foundation around gamification. And I've seen some organizations, as a public example, the Home Office, for example, they use like on energy metrics, when you're buying a fridge, it might be A star rating or B star rating, etc. And you do, when you're buying that fridge, you will look and see, is that energy efficient? And they've basically mapped it, and they have internal dashboards in the Home Office and say which level of cloud spend, are you an A, are you a B? And they compare it to different units. And while that's great, making sure, civil service, etc., value for taxpayers' money, I know they're quite tight on budgets sometimes, but does that again, because if you get too into it, if you've got it's classic example of, if you're developing something, let's say you've got you're testing out a feature, those tests costs take 10 hours, right? And that 10-hour cost on a low-cost server might be £20. But you can do it in 2 hours and it'll cost £100, right? And it makes your developer more productive. If you're paying your developer £30 an hour, you know that it's going to be worth it, right? So you've got to look at it from those other metrics. Also from a development standpoint, is it going to be faster? Again, going back to more customer experience, Like I've been on certain websites where customer experience has been shocking and I've not bought anything, right? So for that instance, it's worth investing in it because you're likely to get more of a sale out of me.
Yeah.
But if you've got quite good, it's like Google, for example. Is it worth Google spending £100 million to improve latency by 0.001 of a second? Not really, because no one's going to notice. I'm sure there is a team at Google doing that, but it's not worth it. And that's same asking to an enterprise, whether you're booking a holiday or renewing your car insurance. Is it worth a bit more faster, or as an individual, can we live with it? And then your profit margins will be bigger. So you've got to ask yourself that.
I think what you're trying to say there, to summarize it, is you need to really map your product and your service value back to your cloud spend. Yeah. And you should map, and you should be able to understand your cloud spend by understanding how your individual teams are using the cloud. Yeah. And then that can give you that almost bi-directional understanding and monitoring of, if I deploy this service, this is how much it costs me from an IT perspective, right? And if I wanted to add a new feature in a utopian world of FinOps, this is roughly how much it's going to cost me to do that. Yeah. That's the dream.
Yeah, I would say look at the entire life cycle of your spend, like how much does it cost for you to develop it? Yeah. Because you could sort of argue is, if you've got a central platforming team and let's say you're working with a business unit, should you charge back the development costs? Or if you're working with internal vendors, etc., so external vendors or consultancies, should you charge back their costs as well? Yeah. So it really does open that conversation, and definitely Contino, that's how we that's one of our more unique selling points, which a lot of people in the market don't focus on. Fine. Is we focus on how are you looking at what is your internal way of charge back, show back? How are you going to address do you charge back to? So we can certainly help with those conversations. Yeah, I think it's getting all the senior leaders in a room and talking about that as well. But it's also around moving on a bit, looking around those KPIs and benchmarks. Is your aim to utilize to cost optimize, to further business value, to increase? You could actually look at FinOps for increasing spend. Bit of a hot topic, but actually, is it worth increasing your spend to improving that business value as well? So that's one other angle to look at. FinOps, I think, to me, FinOps is the wrong phrase for just saving money. Yeah, to me, that is cost optimization, or really cost reduction, and that's been going in any industry, not just IT, for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So it's a bit of a unique way to look at it, personally.
Let's say, let's do it at 3 levels, actually. We're going to have one organization that's new to FinOps. They might be an SME that is trying to get their products out to market as quick as they can, right? But they've got a really wise CTO and a CFO, and maybe they've got a procurement person that they pay, and they're all thinking about FinOps. What's the bare minimum they should be thinking about when it comes to FinOps? And then we'll also do this exercise for a more mature organization. Then we'll go to someone who's one of our clients who's a lot more down the path. So if I was starting off, I've been going for 6 months to a year, got my first product out the door, but I'm seeing my bill increase. I'm getting a bit worried. What are the first things I should be doing as an organization?
I think, to me, for a startup, if your revenue's increasing and your cloud's bill is increasing, that's a good sign to me. I think that as a startup, there's 4 key areas. I think people will disagree with me on this, but I think there's 4 key areas you need to focus on. Is visibility and monitoring. Okay. So is your cloud spend visible? Do you have a dashboard, monitoring solutions, etc.? At that kind of stage, each different vendor, depending who you're working with, has got plentiful and cheap and decent options. I would then look at accountability. Is if you've got platform team, etc., or an infrastructure. Well, more of a case if you've got a platform person, infrastructure person, a couple of developers, who owns that cost, who is accountable. I would then look at let me just think. I've then look at governance and guardrails. So have you got governance, etc., in place? Have you got the guardrails to prevent those anomalies, etc.? I would then also map what you're currently spending to around business value. So let's say you're a SaaS organization, right? You've got a SaaS product. You charge £150 a month. your cloud spend to enable that to the user is between 60 and 100. Let's say your average cost is 75.
Yeah.
So when you're, let's say, pitching to investors,
yeah,
that cost of £150, it might be £75 in cloud spends. You might have £50 for development work, staff costs, etc., office costs, and then your profit is £25. So you then know your profit margin when you're speaking to an investor.
Fine.
So that's how I would look at it.
So just to recap, if you're a startup or a small organization or just really new to FinOps, there's 4 things you're saying we should focus on. There's static reporting, which feels like it could be okay for now. Just having a snapshot once a week, once a month, just to see that trend.
Add in visibility monitoring as well.
Cool. You should also have accountability within your developers, your engineers, your SRE team. Yep. The third one that we're saying is you should have guardrails and policies in place and potentially like alerting, but that might be a bit more advanced, I'd say.
I'd say also tagging strategy as well. I didn't mention that, but that's quite a key one. I would say tagging. These are quite foundational things which, if you put in play now, hopefully as you scale up and you increase your monthly RRR and things like that, you have these foundational policies and you can just keep going. So.
Okay, and then the fourth one was value mapping. So I'd probably say that's the most important, but if you don't have at least some level of visibility and monitoring, it's hard to do that. But you should be able to articulate by saying, if I deliver this product or deliver this service, you're just trying to map that back to the cloud and IT spend in some way. It might not be perfect, but you should be getting into the exercise of thinking about that approach, right?
It's just a rough margin. Like as a business, you're always looking at your profit and losses, etc. Your margins. I would just look at it from that. I think one other area actually for startups I'd look at is what discounts the vendors are offering. If you're a typical startup like AWS, Azure, Google, they have startup programs where I believe it's 150,000 in credits, pounds in credits, depending on the vendor. And there's multiple different things. Like at Microsoft, you got sales now for LinkedIn for free and things like that, depending on your spend or your level where you at. Your M365 licenses. I know AWS have a startup program, depending, like particularly in defense, etc. So or healthcare. But I'd sort of look at that as well and see if you can discount, or if it's just a case of you've got an idea. A lot of vendors have initial £1,000 that you can just go in and get started. You're not having to spend the money yourself. So I'd look around that as well personally.
What I would say is, if you're an IT stakeholder listening in, contact your account manager for one of the big 3 cloud providers, and they'll hook you up. There's discounts to be had on a lot of migration projects, right? And there's innovation funding, as you said. There's a lot of ways that they're trying to entice you to use their services better, which sure, long term, those cloud providers will win, but it's worth exploring how they can support you in your cloud and FinOps journey, right? Because there are options there. Let's try something else.
Okay.
Let's say I'm a really well-established organization.
Okay.
And I think I've got FinOps down. And I think I'm doing really good.
A fair bit,
right?
Go on.
What are the top 3 or 4 things that, if I said such a statement, you'd be like, well, Rosh, so what are you doing then? Are you doing these 3 or 4 things?
Okay, so the first question I ask is, I would say a lot of people would disagree with me on this. Are you using a tool? Because I think a lot of people think that FinOps tools, it's the FinOps tooling landscape, in my opinion, is going to be the next big thing, particularly VC funding. I'm keeping track of it. There's a lot of new players to the game. There's people like Aptio, Cloudability, etc. So Aptio and Cloud Health by VMware, they're sort of dominating the market. There's things like TerraCost, I believe it is, which is a bit of an up and coming tool. So I think a lot of people just say we have a tool and it solves all our problems. It doesn't. And what people don't realize is that tooling for FinOps can be very expensive. Like if you're spending 100 million a year, and let's say the FinOps tool is 2% of your annual cloud spend, for 2 million, it's probably cheaper to come to us and we can help solve a lot of more of your problems for a lot less than that. So I think looking at that as well, I'd ask, are you using the tool? And typically the answer would be yes, it solves all our problems. I'm like, okay, what are the things we got in place? I'd also look at, what kind of people have you got in place? Do you have a FinOps team who does it? I think traditionally it's always been added on to an engineer. Are you giving that time and that ability of that engineer to actually do those practices? I think the FinOps Foundation recommends a team of 13 people for 50 million cloud spend. So, and that sort of scales up. I think it's every person for every 3.5 million, etc.
Right.
So look at it from that perspective as well. Do you have that team in place? I'd also look at what automation strategies you got, because if you're, let's say, established at FinOps, that should be quite a key thing that you've got in place.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think you have that manual. Obviously, things have been quite manual, and then to me, if you're doing FinOps well, you started to automate it.
Yeah.
So look at it from that perspective as well. And I'd also ask, are you looking at it from a wider perspective? How are you looking at on-prem spend as well if you're multi-cloud, which, let's face it, majority of enterprises are.
Yeah.
I'd also look at how you're doing chargeback and showback internally.
Okay.
So
I think there's one key one that you've missed.
Yep.
I'd expect a large organization that thinks they've got FinOps down to be able to predict really well what their future forecasts are going to be. Can they do that via seasonality of their different products or services? How good are they at doing that? And if they are, yeah, well done. Like, smashed it. But I don't think there's a lot of companies and organizations that can do those 5 things that we mentioned at the moment.
Yeah, I would say a few are starting with 1 or 2, or they've got all 5 but at a lower maturity level. I think one other key point actually we both missed is around training, and that's specialized training to the team. That's executive training, finance, procurement, and then what I call mass training. So even if you just design like a 1 hour, 2 hour course to your developers, we were speaking to a customer recently, and they said that they've got 5,000 developers. How am I supposed to train all? Because that would take a lot of time and a lot of money, let's face it. So one thing we actually do is we're in the process of developing a FinOps course, right, for engineers.
Yep.
It's like 1 to 2 hours, covers all the basics, and they have that knowledge. So you can do that at mass levels of training.
Yep.
And particularly with some organizations with 40, 50, 60,000 developers. That's one other way I measure it, is what level of training have you given to them.
Cool. Nice. We mentioned this at the beginning.
Yeah.
But it's worth covering again. FinOps is something that I said we're all hearing about it, especially in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
We're in a difficult economy at the moment.
Yeah.
And that could be a reason why FinOps is particularly important. We're seeing a lot of companies doing cuts, which is never good to hear. Why do you... So is there any other reasons why do you think FinOps is being taken more seriously now than it probably was 2-3 years ago when everyone was just trying to get onto the cloud and accelerate their usage?
I would say those are the 2 perfect examples. I think, to me, they've sort of intertwined together. I think, obviously, the current economic climate has made those CFOs think, what can we reduce? And cloud is typically something that you can quite easily do. It's much easier than getting rid of people.
Yeah.
So that's sort of a logical next step. I think a lot of people have been now in the cloud for 5 to 10 years. They may still be on that journey. But they've been used to the spend, etc. They've had that initial, the boards have set 500 million for spend, etc. They're now at the end of that program over 10 years.
Yeah.
They now need to focus on forecasting and looking at future costs.
Yeah.
And they don't have that ability.
Yeah.
Or they may just do it incorrectly because they've not looked at right sizing, cost rate, optimization, etc.
So let's say someone's listened to this talk for the last 20, 30 minutes, and they're like, okay, Ethan, Rosh is speaking in some sense. I resonate with some of it, right? I want to hear more about what's going on in the FinOps community. Where should people go to learn more?
So I say actually look at the FinOps Foundation. I think it's a great, there's so many great resources on there, and they're very much a friendly bunch.
Okay.
They've been going for about 3 years. They're part of the Linux Foundation. If you're a practitioner, I definitely recommend joining the Slack channel. There's loads of options, channels, etc. Loads of projects. You can get involved with working group.
Yeah.
How I got started is I helped the FinOps Foundation with a working group all about advancing FinOps careers from an early in career standpoint.
Okay.
I'm a bit of a specialist in early in careers and scaling up projects, etc. So I offer to lend a hand with that. There's different working groups if you're interested in taking it further and committing. There's a Slack channel where you can get involved, ask questions, help other people, other practitioners solve their journeys, solve the problems for their journeys, etc. I would say there's also things like meetups. So I'm part of the organising committee for FinOps meetups in the UK, with a few of the amazing folks like Mike Bradbury, and we host events, every couple of months around the UK, particularly in Yorkshire and London. And I'll just, join like, even if you don't know anything about FinOps, the amount of people I see at those events, they don't know much about it, just here to learn, ask those questions, very hands-on, interactive. I would also just have the conversation around in your organization. Like, to me, I've got an interest in economics. And if I wasn't in IT, I probably would have gone, to go study economics, right? So just see if there's anybody internally, put a loud message on Slack and say, look, anybody interested in economics, anybody interested in cloud or curbing our spending? Because no doubt there will be probably someone. So I've seen that from a practitioner standpoint as well when I'm actually hands-on doing it. Yeah. So just do that. I think look at your internal communities, join external communities, and look at the great resources that A, vendors have got, and B, the FinOps Foundation have as well.
And I'm assuming soon there'll be a Contino FinOps session.
Yes. We're hoping to do a FinOps event here at Contino. Okay. It's something which we're very keen to involve and support the community. So yeah.